Welcome to the Art Gallery of New South Wales for our inaugural Directors in Conversation event here on Wednesdays, Art After Hours, where we're going to immerse ourselves in the inside stories of activities at the gallery, where the New South Wales Art Gallery is looking ahead to transformation and a big project, as you know, called Sydney Modern. And our special guest from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art is 5 years ahead of us, having gone through a big renovation, a big transformation program. And so we want to hear a few insights from our special guest, Neal Benezra, who's joining us, as well as from Michael Brand, about how we come to this point where we gather all the energy, the insight, the vision, the money, and deliver these projects. What sort of timing, what sort of reaction, what difference does it make? Transformation is a big, oft-used word these days. We're all in transformation mode. But galleries, art museums, what are they these days? Are they just a matter of pictures hanging on a wall? Are they village squares? Are they town centres? Are they entertainment quarters? What is the role of an art museum in the 21st century? So we're about to find out from these wonderful art directors. So let's welcome, first of all, our very special guest from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Neal Benezra. Welcome. Thanks, Neal. And also, everybody, a man who needs no introduction to all of us here at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, our director, Michael Brand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. Before I start, I would like to just begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here this evening, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, in this place we now call Sydney. And I pay my respects and our respects to elders past and present, and we thank them all. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's good to have a crowd to come and listen to a discussion about the work we do. How does it make you feel, Neal, having an audience here to hear the boss from San Francisco, the director from across the water, bridging that gap? It's good to have you here.
It's great to be in Sydney. Such a beautiful city. Fabulous.
And you've got a great story to tell. Tell us, you just only 2 years ago, you emerged from a basic 2.5 to 3 years closure while the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was transformed. Just tell us a little bit about what happened.
While we were closed?
Yeah. Well, no, generally just the project itself, how it came to be and so on.
So our museum was founded in 1935, and by about 1995 we grew into a new building in a new location. And San Francisco is a very prosperous city full of art enthusiasts, great collectors, and a lot of enthusiasm for our museum. So by the time I arrived at the museum, 2002, it was very clear that we needed to grow some more, that there was great art in our community and great programming, and we were really successful in a lot of different ways. So by around 2008-09, when the economy hit its absolute nadir, we wisely or unwisely decided we were going to expand again. And it took us about 5-6 years, but we got the museum open in May of 2016. And we had this hiatus because we had to close the museum for construction purposes for about 2.5 years. And so we decided we had to make lemonade out of the lemons that came our way. And so we reinvented ourselves as SFMOMA on the go, and we organized projects and exhibitions around the city of San Francisco and around the state of California to really re-engage with our communities.
Because you wanted to keep that presence. You didn't want to be forgotten while this was all going on.
Couldn't possibly disappear, but a very supportive board that supported this effort. We didn't have a home. We were homeless for a couple of years, and so it gave us an opportunity to rethink ourselves in, I think, a really positive way.
And we'll talk about the contrast between the museums as well, because yours is fully private.
Fully private.
Whereas, Michael, the Art Gallery of New South Wales is the New South Wales Art Museum. It is the repository for all this wonderful collection of $1 billion or more collection of artwork here, and so a very different scenario. So the background to the Sydney Modern project, just take us through that, because that's been many years in the making as well.
You know, we're actually an older institution than the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And I think people in Sydney often forget that we're older than most American art museums, but we all have very, very different histories. So we go back to 1870s, and it was thought here that we had done all we could do within this building, so we needed more space. But it wasn't just having more space, it was having different types of spaces. And I think that's one of the interesting things for me, talking with Neal, and last year having a chance to go and see what they've done at SFMOMA, to see how we break out of that traditional pattern of the permanent collection galleries over there. They change every 10 years or so. Temporary exhibitions downstairs, you change them every 3 months, and that's what you do. Now, I think we're in an age where people expect much more of art museums. But when they expect much more, here they're also expecting their government to support that. And as Anne said, we're a public-private organisation, so we've achieved a great level of public support through the government, but we also have to raise private funds. But we don't have to raise quite as much private funds as Neal had to in San Francisco.
Exactly. And I think what this leads me to is Neal has already mentioned that it led to new thinking, this new project to build the new modern San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. The next iteration of it meant that you had to have new thinking, create new projects, and so you also need to rethink about what the role of an art museum is. So did all of that happen during those 3 years of on the go before you then opened again? And I'm asking, what's the role of a museum, a modern museum of the 21st century?
That 2.5-year period when we were without a home was an opportunity. We really tried to turn it into an opportunity to rethink ourselves. And museums are changing. I think we're becoming more explicitly public institutions. It used to be that a certain class of people would come to a museum. The museum would be open between 11 and 4, so only certain people could come. And that's past tense at this point. We're now much more engaged. We're not providing respite from the world. We have to, I think, all be engaged with the world. We want the world to come in with with all the issues and challenges and opportunities that means. We have to be fully engaged with the world and the community in which we reside. So we use that 2.5 years to really rethink what that meant and how we, in our choice of architect, in the way we program, our digital program, it's not just about the art anymore. I think we're now trying to put people on the same plane as the works of art that we show. And
you said also the old museum was closed in a way, and so an old building, and so to open it out to the world fits with, I think, the ambition of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, certainly, but that was part of the ambition as well?
The architects we hired for our project, a firm called Snøhetta, a Norwegian-American firm, with virtually no experience designing museums. We felt as though we could be good museum clients. We had a pretty good sense of what we wanted artistically. But what they brought us, and I have to say, Sanab, I think, will bring to the art gallery the same sense of openness and welcome. There's a kind of transparency to our building and your design that I think will really serve the Sydney community really, really well.
So tell us about the spaces that you have, if you can just give us a sense of what the exhibition spaces are like and what the public spaces are like, how much more space you have for what sort of activities. So, because we're a private museum and we really have to generate all of our own income, so we have to charge, what I believe are rather high prices, $25 to come to the museum. So we decided early on that it would be really important to balance that with having a lot of free space. So you come to the museum and you want to see our special exhibitions and our collections, you pay the $25. But we have about 40,000 square feet at the ground level that anyone can come into. And we've got works of art there and a lot of activity, educational programming and restaurants and so forth and so on, to try to balance the frankly high price of a museum ticket. Michael, the philosophy a bit similarly here, opening up spaces, making more of that open public space, as well as opening the doors to galleries and exhibitions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's happened with both our projects is that we've actually embarked on the projects at a very, very good time. I think some of the earlier museum expansions, including our ones here, this one from 1972 and 1998, which are very fine pieces of architecture. But by and large, those early expansions were building more of the same sorts of spaces. But with these sort of projects now, we can go beyond that. So we're actually building new types of spaces rather than just building more space. And certainly the Sana design for Sydney Modern is a much less hierarchical type of building. I mean, I love this building, but you're walking through the columns, you're walking through the front door, you have a very axial pathway right down the escalators. The new building will be much more free-form than that. And I think that's going to allow us to think differently about the sort of spaces that the public encounters. But in general, I think the idea of having a building you can approach and you can see people inside from outside, and that's certainly something that happens at SFMOMA, where in one of those public free spaces, which is Sarah now, people just get tempted from the street, they can walk in. That's a very, very important thing for people who aren't traditional museum goers. And I think we, like all our colleague museums, we're trying to get to broaden our audience. We love you all coming, it's fantastic, but we know there are many people who don't come as loyally as you do. And one of the things that puts them off is a very forbidding facade. You certainly had that in San Francisco with the Bota building, which is a great example of architecture, but is not, say, welcoming. This is a beautiful piece of late 19th century architecture, but for people who aren't used to museum buildings, particularly a lot of refugees who have come from places where columns and pediments mean police stations, Central Intelligence Agency or whatever, you've got to rethink about what it would take to attract someone into a building who's never been to a museum before.
And this is what this is what we're talking about. We were very privileged last night, a few of us, to listen to Dr. Maria Balshaw, who is the head of the Tate Museum in the UK, 4 times more successful so far than the numbers that they originally had predicted. So this wonderful institution that many of you would know of and have certainly been to has this open door. She talked about the open door policy, the policy of everything being open on every side so that we all can enter these spaces and participate in the conversation. And, may I say, for those of us who are immersed in the art world, for people who haven't grown up in the art world, she said, this gives them more confidence, more opportunity to enter the art world because all of a sudden it's more inviting. Is that a sense that you get from this modern era of art museums?
I think absolutely, and as Michael's speaking, I think there's a kind of democratic character to our building and to your design. There's a transparency and a sense of welcome, and that the columns, and we have a big, strong, if you know our building from 1995, it's a big, strong, muscular building, but it really says, stay out. Don't call us, we'll call you. We've got good stuff in here, and we'll let you know when you can come see it. Well, that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in the 21st century, and I think there's a kind of a democratic value to the architecture that we're describing. It expresses certain kinds of values that we really need our museums to express.
And there are certain global issues, isolation, lack of opportunity, those sorts of things that Maria was talking about last night. This is what galleries, another purpose for galleries of the 21st century, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think public art museums are definitely a very special sort of civic space. They're basically non-commercial. In our case, they're free of charge, where you hope people come to look at art, but you also hope people come to think, to be challenged, to talk to each other. And while I don't think art museums should be just sort of illustrating, current political issues or economic issues or environmental issues, we're more than just illustrators, but we should be able to show art in a way that through visual language we encourage people to think more deeply, and ideally we want to engender conversations. And I think that's where both our museums and many of our partners, it is not just a curatorial practice anymore. There is the public programs team, there's the digital team, and together they create the fuller museum experience. I mean, I'm still super happy if I see someone walking up to a painting by themselves, looking at the painting, reading the label. That's also fantastic, but I think we all know we can and should do more than that as well.
I think to that point, Michael, Neal has a wonderful example about something that we've been through in recent years, the marriage equality debate. And you said that while we don't want to get political as a gallery, we certainly can acknowledge that the times in which we live. So tell us a little bit about the exhibition or how you approach that debate. San Francisco, it's a big, strong community as Sydney is. And so you inserted yourself in that conversation.
And it was a very hot political issue. It's a little bit less so, but it was on boil maybe 6-7 years ago in San Francisco, where we have a very large gay community.
Yeah.
And marriage equality was a very, very big topic. And so, we can't be partisan, we can't take sides, but we can be engaged.
Yeah.
So what we did was to mount a relatively small exhibition, really on one long wall in our galleries, and we commissioned a lot of work. We commissioned drawings, poetry, a number of different expressions on the topic, mounted them on the wall, and people flooded to see that show. And it meant something in that community at that moment. It was very, very timely. And it said to me that, it's fundamentally important for us to be engaged in our times. We're not apart from the world, we're part of the world. And we let the world in.
And Michael, similar approach here. These new spaces will give us more than ample opportunity to participate, be a part of, acknowledge, and so on, issues of the time and globally and locally.
Yeah, and also in new museums in particular, it isn't just about the pure gallery spaces, which we need. We need beautiful gallery spaces where you can hang works with controlled lighting and proper ceiling heights and all the rest. But it's often the in-between spaces where the community gathers first and they sort of come together and they talk before or after looking at art. I think one of my sort of proudest moments here at the gallery was 2 or 3 weeks ago, on a late Wednesday night. We had queer art after hours, right after the Mardi Gras. We had something like 4,000 people after 5 o'clock. And you felt that with the whole marriage equality thing sort of done and dusted, that this was a real celebration. The community was coming out to a public art space, a public space, and they were having a great time. And it was at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And while they were doing it, they were looking at art. Neal, we've had some great experience here. We've had drag queens leading tours of the collection. To me, it was a really perfect example of a public institution and a community coming together. But we're not sort of just sort of trying to attract them in to get numbers. It is also to have a genuine experience here, and we think that our collection, both contemporary and historical, is very relevant to many communities, and particularly, at that moment, it was a great time to talk about issues through art.
Very difficult balance, I imagine. We have a big collection at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Our own collection is wonderful. We don't see enough of it. We'll see more of it in this new building. But walking that fine line between showing the collection we hold, but also then having visiting exhibitions and all this, how do we manage that in galleries of the future? It's not just a matter of coming in and seeing an exhibition only and paying a ticket. It's more about the broader experience, is it?
Yes, I think for us, our temporary exhibition spaces they're just not big enough. They're not big enough, they're not tall enough to do all the shows we like. For some shows, they work beautifully. I think anyone who saw the recent Rembrandt and the Dutch Golden Age exhibition, I hope you'd agree, that was a beautiful exhibition design and a wonderful experience. But there are shows we can't do. Part of a challenge with big exhibitions now is architectural or spatial, and we'll certainly be able to do some even more ambitious shows in a new building. But talking to Neal and other colleagues, there are other very practical issues which are really making you wonder, is this where we should be spending all our money? I mean, we have a wonderful system of state government indemnity. So basically, the New South Wales state government indemnifies or insures these loan exhibitions we bring in. Neal can tap into some of that in the US, but you're saying that that's one of the biggest problems. It's not just borrowing the works, it's paying the insurance.
The insurance values based on, we constantly reading about some new auction in New York or London where some painting goes for $100 million, $200 million. Well, when it comes time to borrow those pictures for an exhibition, the owner places, a fair market value in terms of the insurance value of that work, and we have to pick up the premiums for this, and it's becoming unaffordable. So one of the things I'm beginning to think about as we're in a position now where we can make it, because our collection has grown in number and quality pretty profoundly in the last 5 years. But does it make sense for us to mount these kinds of exhibitions where we're spending so much money on insurance? And the other thing is I'm beginning to think that We have a very youthful audience in San Francisco. 45% of our visitors are 35 and under.
That's that. 45, and what ours is, 45% of visitors to your are 35 and under.
Just beautiful, because it speaks well for the future.
That's fantastic.
But those younger people want to come to a museum for different reasons than perhaps their parents did or an older generation did. They're less interested, we're finding, in coming to see a retrospective exhibition where you trace the development of an artist from their youth to their later career. They're interested in more immersive kind of experiences, maybe less interested in the specific art object or the specific artist. They're interested in coming to the museum to be with their friends, to be engaged socially, and I don't mean it in a party kind of sense, to be engaged with people. They want to be together.
Is it this human moment thing that we're seeking with technology all around us?
With technology all around us, and everything now, and I'm sure it's the same here in Australia, everything can be delivered to your home, either online or in person. And when people go out, they want to be engaged. They want to be immersed in some kind of an experience. And I think we've got to be venues for that kind of activity.
And so what have you done to actually attract that audience, bring them in? What different things have you taken to market? Yeah.
So knowing that our audience is so young, we made an exhibition this past fall, which was called Soundtracks. And it was organized by our media arts curator. And if you walked in, you would not see a single static, silent work of art hanging on a wall. Everything was immersive in one way or another. It was about sound. It was about moving image. An absolutely untraditional exhibition of art as it's being defined today. As I mentioned earlier, at the same time we had a retrospective of the work of Robert Rauschenberg, classic contemporary artist, great figure. We have a big collection. The show had come from the Tate and the Modern, and all the things that traditionally a museum would want to mount in an exhibition. Well, the attendance for the soundtrack show exceeded the attendance for the Rauschenberg show, to my shock. And there's a lesson in that. We have to think about the next generation of audience. We need to think about different kinds of experience in a museum, not just hanging those walls, the paintings on the walls, but thinking about how people interact in an art space.
How important is this, Michael? Yes, you're about to say something, I'm sure, so go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to reflect on what Neal said about, with say, often the younger audiences perhaps looking for more immersive experiences rather than, say, a chronological narrative of one artist's career or one movement. And it may be that what we have to think about more is how do we give a more immersive experience of historical art? Because certainly in this museum, you're basically post-Second World War in most of what you do. We are both historical and contemporary, but perhaps that's the exhibition of the future, The Lady and the Unicorn, where you borrow 6 extraordinary works of art and you make an installation which is immersive in itself. You walk in, you don't have to go through 10 rooms following a trail of 150 labels. You just get in there and you are immersed in these extraordinary tapestries dating from about 1500 in Paris. So it's actually a very interesting moment where we know there's an interest in art museums. They're hugely popular around the world. We know there's an interest in art. People are more visually literate. But we can get to experiment. We don't have to just keep on doing, Monet in summer, Monet in spring. I saw one advert recently, Monet in architecture. And it was a little hut on a cliff in Britain. You're thinking, I don't think he was actually that interested in architecture.
That's pretty thin.
I think that's pretty thin, yeah.
I want this bringing this collaboration between art directors the world over seems to be gathering a little bit of momentum. You all know each other, I'm sure, around the world, but building the bridges, I think, certainly, Michael, for us here in Australia, back over to the US and into other parts of the world, is this part of a collaborative effort that maybe museums, we're all looking to participate in the future?
Yeah, this is something I've been interested in for a long time. When I was back at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra a long time ago, we organised long-term loans from a Shanghai museum, again, trying to get away from the model that the only way you can show art is if you buy it and own it. And that just, buying everything you want to show is just no longer possible. And it's not just historical art, it's contemporary art as well. We have actually quite similar acquisition budgets. And while we do buy some good stuff, but it's small numbers if you rely just on your actual budget. So I think it's sort of looking at different ways of bringing art to people, and one is through partnerships and alliances. I don't think we haven't quite found the perfect model yet, but a number of us are talking about ways where we can perhaps share the collections more easily. When I was at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, we belonged to a group called FRAME, French Regional and American Museum Exchange. So basically it was museums in France and America that weren't in New York City, Washington, or Paris. And we basically we lend things all the time. That was a very interesting model, but got probably a bit too big. But I think perhaps small groups can work out ways where we can just send things backwards and forwards. We have to share. There's no other way of bringing to you all the sort of work you'd like to see if we rely on buying it. And even just paying large fees to borrow exhibitions from distinguished art museums, that's very problematical too.
And Neal had a wonderful, I think, a very pioneering initiative in the US where you share the purchase price, share the cost between other museums, which is quite a clever way of doing it for works.
The whole tradition of Western museums has been predicated on a particular institution, a particular community, building a collection, and having a kind of ownership of one's collection over time. And the model worked, I think, pretty well for a long time, but I think these days we're thinking differently about this. There's no reason why we can't co-own works of art. And so we've been pretty aggressive about this in the last few years, and we've co-acquired works with the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, Art Institute of Chicago, Walker Art Center, and there could be a lot more of this because there's no real reason why we have to own a museum, a work of art in a singular way. Why not co-own it, co-acquire it, and share it back and forth?
This also, let's get on to the matter of building collections and so on. And so for you, Neal, a private art museum needs huge benefaction. We know about the USA, big money, big benefaction. But tell us a bit about the support you got. It's long-term engagement, I know, but when you had this new project on the drawing board, you obviously had to wait until you had the money, but also you had to then get some engagement with those big supporters. The family who owned Gap clothing came to the fore. You had a campaign for art. So a couple of these initiatives that came together, but with this incredible support, they were obviously persuaded by the vision you had to expand and transform anyway.
So I'm really blessed to be working in San Francisco, which is not only a very prosperous city, it's a city that really values innovation, and it's a very philanthropic city. So we've long had a history of great collectors of modern, but especially contemporary art in our city. And we faced a kind of an interesting challenge, but I think we turned it into an opportunity, in that we needed to raise a lot of money to build our museum and to endow it, because we don't have government funding.
Tell us about the numbers just while you're going through this.
Well, we raised about $600 million, about half of it to build the building, and again, because we have very little, just a few $100,000 in total government support. We had to raise a lot of money for endowment, from which we could draw on an annual basis at a 5% rate. So that underpins our operations. So we had to raise quite a lot of money, not just to build the building, but to ensure that our financial stability was secure. But at the same time, because there are so many great collectors in our community, we were able to persuade families, individuals to either promise works of art contractually to the museum or give them outright. And there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm about this. And I think about 3,000 works of art have come to us in the last 6 or 7 years.
Yes, tell us about this family, because it's a 100-year lease of a collection of about 1,000 paintings from Don.
So this is a couple in San Francisco named Doris and Donald Fisher. They founded Gap and built one of the great collections of contemporary art really in the world, and collected, really fortuitously selected great artists and collected them in great depth and great quality. So, 25 Warhols and 23 Gerhard Richters and
deep envy.
On and on and on. No problem. So what we did was What's happened in our country is that, the history of, because we just don't have much money to buy art with, we're dependent upon these gifts. So what has happened is, as some of these collectors of major quantity and quality have gotten to the point where they really felt as though they didn't want to just hand over their collection to the local museum, and they've started to found private museums all their own. And so this has become an issue for us because we need that benefaction to come to the museums. So we have to be a little more innovative in the way we work with people. So with the Fisher family, longtime trustees of the museum, we invented something that hasn't really been tried before, and that is the works of art go into a foundation collection. The foundation collection is on deposit with us contractually for a minimum of 100 years. It was accompanied by a major capital campaign gift to build the building. And at the end of that 100-year period, we have the option to renew the relationship, which I'm sure we'll do. So, thinking outside the box in terms of the way these works of art can come to us.
And the agreement, too, on what you use and when and so on. So there are all those sort of terms as well.
It's complicated.
Yeah. But the family it's been a great result, right? I mean, you've turned it into is it a terrific experience from their point of view?
I think it's been wildly successful. And the interesting thing about it for me was when we made this deal, I was afraid that it would forestall, because it was such a big gift, that it would forestall gifts from other collectors. Yeah. And in fact, it inspired people to be more generous because people could see there was something exciting happening, and they wanted to be part of it.
And you also had a campaign for art, which ran in parallel as the gallery was being built. Right. And so calling for donations from just far and wide.
I think there were about 225 people contributed collections to.
And there were, about 3,000 works?
About 3,500 works total.
And that would require a bit of curatorial discipline, I imagine. Can you accept everything?
Well, that's another story. I need our curators to be a little more disciplined.
Okay.
Our curators tend to want everything.
Yes, of course.
Everything they can get their hands on. And, a little curatorial connoisseurship would be in order sometimes.
It's something I'm sure we deeply envy, Michael, here. We have great benefactors, yes, and we have certainly wonderful collections with whom we work, but the bigger picture from our point of view, looking ahead, how are we going to attract that? This
art museum has actually done very, very well with benefaction. And some of our earliest acquisitions in the late 19th century were through basis of campaigns for private support. We've had major gifts along the way, perhaps the John Caldor family collection being the most significant one recently, about 15 years or so ago. And again, whether you're in the US or Australia, you can only build collections with private support. We get no government support for our acquisition program at all. We used to for the first 120 years or so, but since 1991, no state support for that. So we also rely on public donations. But that's a good thing too, because I think when your community has sort of basically bought into the institution by donating to it, whether it's cash as well as works of art, it is a very special relationship, and it becomes more than a government department. It becomes a publicly sort of owned institution. And I think it really is important to keep promoting that. I mean, everyone's entitled to build a private museum if they want to, and there's some wonderful examples around the world. I mean, Mona in Tasmania, everyone loves going there. But there is something very particular about this sort of place where you are this evening, where we have a publicly owned collection that you own, that we research, we publish, we develop school programs around, and that you tend to do more if you either own them outright, or if you know they're going to be there for at least 100 years, you can build a program around them. So short-term loans are great, but I think to be a wonderful public art institution, you do need to have that core of works you can build your program around.
And building that program also is part of the collaboration we have with government too at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, because in the end it's a very competitive space. The money may have been raised by the government, but it was to go to many things, including sports stadiums or galleries, so this competitive space, the rush, or the grab for funding. So we did very well, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, I think, to extract quite a lot of funding, knowing that we also had to raise money. But this is a very difficult and competitive space, and we need, what sort of thinking, how do we keep the government on side, Michael?
I mean, we often sort of quite envious of our American colleagues, and we think of their giant endowments and their huge gifts. But when I talk to my American colleagues about getting, for the Sydney Modern Project, a commitment from the state government of New South Wales of $244 million, none of my American colleagues would get anything like that from a government. I think Los Angeles County Museum of Art, for their new $800 million campaign, I think they've got about $150 million from LA County. That is highly unusual in the US. So we're in one way, we're very, very lucky to have that. And that is a very interesting relationship because it does actually mean that you will actually do own the collection. But, we have to look at different ways of doing things. And just to step back for a minute to this idea of joint ownership, I don't know if you're all aware that yesterday the MCA announced their round 3 of a special relationship they have with Tate in London, where they're jointly acquiring works of contemporary Australian art that'll belong to MCA and Tate, and it'll be shown in London, which is a fantastic thing for Australian artists, but also even more so a fantastic thing for audiences in London who get to experience Australian art.
And important to say that that's funded by Qantas.
Yes, and Qantas will fly the works backwards and forwards, which is a pretty good deal too.
So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, that's
because for us to own things jointly in Sydney, nice idea, but if you're trying to bring a Jeff Koons out from San Francisco, that's going to probably undermine the financial benefit.
But I see this collaboration, and Neal and I spoke earlier about this. Neal, the collection, say, in San Francisco, yours is American, opened in 1935, didn't you, the gallery? So it's a certain era, and so therefore this is part of you now looking, the essence is to look further beyond your borders and across your oceans and so on. And so where do you think you could take your next generation of collecting or
one of the reasons
engagement?
I'm here.
Of course.
No, and the good thing about our institution, like other institutions, is we've been the beneficiaries of tremendous generosity in terms of the works of art that have come to us. But at the same time, that generosity is based on the collecting habits and interests of our private individuals in our community. So in our particular case, in the United States in the 80s and 90s, there was a great passion for, I would call it Western European and North American art. And we have great collections, as I mentioned, Warhol and Richter and Kiefer and Ellsworth Kelly and so on and so forth. And that's great, but it's also limiting. It's largely a collection of male artists. Mm-hmm. It's not a terribly diverse collection. It is not at all as international as it needs to be. And so our next big step is to really confront this. It's hard to do that because of the cost of works of art from of the quality I'm describing to fill in those gaps. But we really want to lean into the 21st century and think much more internationally. And it has to be a much more diverse collection. Although we're very good in terms of gender representation in our special exhibitions, we're not so good in our collection. We've got to do some work there. And, we've been having meetings and talking a lot about what can be done. And, we're really thinking a lot about Latin America because California will be largely Spanish-speaking in the next, say, 5 or 10 years. And we really want to think a lot about Asia-Pacific. We want to really, I think, we'd be darn fools not to take advantage of our geographical location and really pointed toward Asia. Yeah. And we need to be thinking not just toward New York and London and Paris, but thinking about, Sydney and Hong Kong and Shanghai.
Fabulous. And as Maria Balshaw said last night, the looking ahead at also reflecting the diversity of the community in which we live. So we exist in this community, Sydney, Australia, even as locally as this eastern side of the city of Sydney. What do we represent? So, that's forming part of the thinking as well as we look ahead, Michael?
Absolutely. My feeling is that art museums, their strongest relationship is with a city rather than a country. But it's interesting, again, listening to Neal speak over the last couple of days, and at SFMOMA, you talk about you've got a special interest in Californian art, and then you talk about Western European art, growing interest in Asia, the Pacific, but you don't really talk about American art. Where in Australia, and it struck me when I was introducing Neal to a sort of a staff workshop this afternoon. We divide our institution basically. We have a division for Australian art, a division for international art, where you don't really have you don't sort of interest yourself particularly in what's American about art at the moment, do you?
No, we really try not to think that way. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, do you see that changing going forward?
Well, I think
that distinction?
It probably will, but I think that's sort of partly because we're in a changed environment here too, where, frankly, no one else is going to do Australian art if we didn't do it. And we've done it very well, and we're very proud of our collections. But it is something where you can get trapped into, you keep doing the same things. It seems very logical to have a department of Australian art. But as we move into contemporary art, it's really much more a universal process. And also, what I've always loved about the Art Gallery of New South Wales is beyond about 1980s or 1970s, we've always shown all the art together. We've never had a gallery for contemporary Australian art and next to it a gallery for sort of international contemporary art. But I think we do have a responsibility to show the history of Australian art to Australians and to international visitors. But beyond a certain point, I think you realise that it's all just really good art, hopefully.
But I think it's important, if I'm coming from the States or any place else, to be able to come to the Art Gallery of New South Wales and learn something about Australian art. Because, as you say, we don't have it in our country. Just as the same way, if someone from Sydney comes to San Francisco, we have a very particular tradition of art making in our part of the country, and it's really very important, and we believe in this and we act on it. That you be able to see what's the best work that's been made in our community. So we don't organize ourselves that way, but we feel the same commitment that you do.
We're getting close to the end of this conversation. We're getting the wind up. We've been having a lovely conversation. So I think, in conclusion, you've just talked. It illustrates that we have an educational role, certainly at galleries, but we also have a role to open up the conversation, open up the opportunities, and open up free people and get them thinking and engaging and conversing and talking and challenging them and so on. So I think, in conclusion, Neal, the art gallery, the art museum of the future, what can we look forward to, just in summary? What is it looking like? I know we've summarised it a bit, but
small
just
question.
Generally, yeah.
I think what I'm looking forward to is the opportunity for our museum and for other museums to really engage in a more open way beyond the collectors, and we can't make programs just for the art interested audience, because there's a real limit to that. We have to, and I think that you express this in your architecture and your program and everything you do, we've got to program in a way and think in a way that will engage all sorts of people, all kinds of classes of people, all kinds of groups of people, and be really, truly democratic institutions.
I think that's a wonderful summary, don't you? And Michael, your sense of the future?
I think in some ways you're probably asking the wrong people, because really it's the artists we should be asking, because in 25 years' time our museums are going to be full of the art that artists now are making over the next 25 years, and we don't know what they're going to be making.
But don't we ask the audiences as well, though?
Because, and the audience as well. And we've got to be nimble and open and responsive enough to reflect what artists are doing and what audiences want to see. Now, I think there is definitely the curatorial role for the art museum. It isn't just showing what people think they want. We're also trying to challenge you and showing you things that we know that you actually will not like probably when you see them first. But we hope we can build an environment in many ways where you at least trust us, because you're in a fantastic architectural space. You'll trust us to look at those works and perhaps think about them more deeply, perhaps come to love them and admire them. But I think it's much more of a partnership now between sort of the museum professionals, the artists, and you as audience, and the way you want to experience art. And we presume now you don't just want to be taught, that you want to have a different sort of more interesting relationship.
It's a bilateral relationship.
Yeah, cross borders, all that. Michael Brand, we were opening in 2021.
Late 2021.
So that whole full experience is about to emerge and unfold. So thank you, Michael Brand, and also thank you, Neal Benezra. Fabulous to have you here from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here this evening.